Hey there. Can I sit with something tender for a moment? Something people don't always say out loud because they're afraid it will sound childish, unreasonable, or unfair. The wish that someone would notice, not because you want attention, not because you expect people to read your mind, but because sometimes you're tired of always being the one who has to explain, tired of having to find the words, tired of having to translate your exhaustion into something understandable, tired of having to say, "I'm struggling, I'm not okay, I need help." Because maybe you've spent so much of your life being the one who notices other people. You notice when someone becomes quieter than usual. You notice when their smile looks forced. You notice when they're overwhelmed, discouraged, or carrying too much. You remember things. You check in. You pay attention. And perhaps, somewhere deep inside, there's been a quiet hope that one day someone would do the same for you, that someone would see past the "I'm fine," that someone would recognize the tiredness in your eyes, that someone would ask twice, that someone would notice the difference. And when that doesn't happen, it's easy to feel hurt, not because you're expecting perfection from people, but because being unseen is painful, especially when you've become so accustomed to making yourself understandable for everyone else. And maybe that's what hurts most. Not that people are cruel, not that they don't care, but that life keeps moving. People get distracted. Everyone carries their own burdens, and somehow your quiet struggles become easy to miss, which can leave you feeling strangely alone. Not because nobody loves you, but because part of you longs to be known without always having to wave your arms and announce your pain. And honestly, I don't think that longing makes you needy. I think it makes you human, because all of us, in one way or another, want to feel seen, not just appreciated for what we do, not just admired for how strong we are, but seen. Seen in our tiredness, seen in our effort, seen in the moments when we're trying very hard to hold ourselves together. And perhaps you've become so good at appearing okay that people assume you are. Perhaps you've carried things so quietly that others have mistaken your silence for strength. And that can become its own kind of loneliness. Because sometimes the strongest people are not the people who need the least. They're simply the people who have learned to need things quietly. And quiet needs are still needs. Quiet pain is still pain. Quiet exhaustion is still exhaustion. It deserves tenderness too. I think one of the saddest things people do is shame themselves for wishing someone would notice, as though having that desire means they're weak, as though longing to be understood without having to explain every detail is asking for too much. But maybe it isn't. Maybe it's just the heart's way of saying, "I've been carrying a lot. I'd like to feel less alone in it." And perhaps there is nothing shameful about that.
Because being deeply independent doesn't erase the human desire to be cared for. Being capable doesn't mean you never want comfort. And being the one who holds everything together doesn't mean you don't sometimes wish someone would quietly say, "You seem tired. How are you, really?" You don't have to carry everything by yourself. I think many people who quietly carry everything eventually begin to believe that needing to be noticed is somehow selfish. So they become even quieter. They tell themselves not to bother anyone. They convince themselves that everyone else has enough on their plate. And little by little, they become experts at disappearing inside their own lives. Not physically, but emotionally. They become the person everyone relies on. The person who says, "Don't worry about me." The person who keeps showing up. The person who rarely asks for anything. And sometimes the world rewards that kind of strength by assuming it doesn't need care, which is a heartbreaking misunderstanding. Because reliability is not the same thing as invulnerability. And being strong doesn't mean you don't get tired. It doesn't mean you don't wish someone would sit beside you and say, "You don't always have to be the one holding everything together." I know life doesn't always give us those moments when we want them. And I know people cannot always see what we never allow ourselves to show. But please, don't turn that disappointment into evidence that your needs are unreasonable. Please don't decide that because people missed your pain didn't matter, because it does, and so do you. And maybe tonight, before asking yourself why nobody noticed, you can acknowledge something else, that you've been carrying more than you've admitted, that you've been trying harder than most people realize, that you've been showing up while quietly hoping someone would see beyond the surface. And honestly, that hope says something beautiful about you. It says that despite everything, your heart still longs for closeness, still believes in being understood, still hopes for gentleness. And I don't think that's weakness. I think that's something precious. So if you've been sitting with that quiet wish lately, the wish that someone would simply notice, I hope you'll stop treating that longing like something embarrassing. Because the truth is, you were never asking for too much. You weren't asking to be rescued. You weren't asking for people to read your mind. You were asking for what every human heart quietly hopes for: to be remembered, to be considered, to have someone pause long enough to say, I see that you've been carrying a lot. And if nobody has said that to you lately, then let me say it now. I see how hard you've been trying. I see the effort that rarely gets mentioned. I see the strength you've had to borrow from yourself over and over again. And I see the tiredness underneath it. You shouldn't have had to become invisible just because you became reliable. You shouldn't have had to hide your needs just because you learned how to survive without much help. And you certainly don't have to earn the right to be cared for, because your worth was never hidden inside how well you held everything together. You matter before the explanations. You matter before the words. You matter before anyone notices. And even if the world has overlooked parts of your story, those parts are still worthy of tenderness. They always were. So tonight, you don't have to convince me that you're tired. You don't have to prove that you've been strong. I believe you. And I want you to know this: just because your pain has been quiet doesn't mean it has been small. Just because you've carried it gracefully doesn't mean you deserved to carry it alone. And just because people have missed what you've been going through doesn't mean you were ever invisible.